between the queer patients I work with and also some of the experiences that I see kind of like in the general culture, it's become very clear, I think, to many of us that the ways that we think about consent just doesn't work. Kind of like this notion of affirmative consent, where kind of like you negotiate, you have good communication, and at least so the promise goes, if you do that well, kind of like a good sexual contact or a good sexual encounter can follow. But that leaves out a lot of how things work, including the fact that consent, and this is one of the points that I'm trying to make in my book, including the fact that consent is not necessarily only about negotiating with another person, but also has a lot to do with what you will allow yourself to experience, what kind of risks you will take with yourself. And queerness and risk have a lot of adjacencies. So I've been interested in risk for a very long time. So I start with trying to map a different way of thinking about consent, which I call limit consent, which has less to do with trying to patrol one's borders and more to do with what happens when one kind of like throws oneself into experience, when one begins to take risks, not with the other person's boundaries, but with one's own boundaries. Which is not necessarily the way we usually think about consent. Usually we understand it as an interpersonal negotiation. And I start from there and kind of like proceed to explore a number of different topics, some of which we may talk about today. One of them being like what technically in the book I call perversion, and I will call perversion here too, to speak about sexualities that are not necessarily pathological, but which kind of like play with affects and experiences that we don't usually understand as sexual, like disgust or humiliation, or kind of like racial debasement, which is one of the topics in the book that I talk about quite a bit. And more generally, sexualities that are brushing up against trauma.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, but my first question to you is from towards the beginning of what you said, which is, you said how we talk about consent isn't working, or like something like that. Like, what to you isn't working? What doesn't work?
Well, consent, at least the way that we think about consent, like say through the Me Too movement, which has made it possible, if not shown us how necessary it is to be able to think about boundaries and the respect of boundaries. But at the same time, that way of understanding what consensual negotiations mean begins to set up this, what I think is really a fantasy, that if you and I are beginning to like try to figure out how we're going to have, say, an erotic encounter, the fantasy goes, you ask me what I want, I tell you what I don't want, like I have full access to myself, to what will activate me, to what will be exciting, I communicate that to you, and then the two of us play kind of like sexually within these limits. But the fact is that psychic life doesn't work like that. It doesn't necessarily apply that what we discuss now will come to materialize to be true in like half an hour from now, or even 2 minutes from now. And kind of like how one gets both triggered, but also like excited, or kind of like having experiences that are not necessarily about being a good and safe experience, but an experience that ushers in something new. Like transformational experiences are not guaranteed by safety. Something else makes transformational experiences happen. And
do you feel like that's, I'm just like thinking about this, and do you feel like that's like more like, I'm trying to conceptualize this, but like strangers versus partners. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, you think about like, I don't know, even thinking about like the first time you might have kissed someone and like they didn't know it was coming. That was not really consented to in the definition of what you're saying of consent. But there's something exciting about not knowing that the thing is going to happen. That's sort of what you're talking about here.
In part, I'm talking about that. Like in your example, like part of what is exciting is that something happens that is not something that you have necessarily like controlled or anticipated, and it happens and it brings a certain kind of thrill and a frisson that you didn't quite expect. But there's also like other kinds of experiences. I'm not talking just about sexual experiences in the sense of like having sex or having a sexual encounter. I'm also talking about certain encounters with art that can feel extremely, can stun us, can like really throw us for a loop, where you may become obsessed with a piece of art, or become really preoccupied with a movie or with film or with a piece of theater. Like in the book, I talk about having become quite preoccupied with a theatrical piece. And in many ways, things that we become transfixed about happen in what I've come to describe as they're at the border of our consent. I'm not talking about consent that is violated, where you say, I don't want to do that, and somebody's pushing you to do that. But I am talking about things that are at the border of where you sense that something is happening, you sense that you might be willing to experience something, and it opens up to a space of something that is unexpected. Maybe you have a good kiss, maybe you have a terrible kiss, maybe you have a kiss that reminds you of some really bad experience. And we have become so preoccupied in a way that is extremely neoliberal and very kind of like organized around specific, especially in thinking about queerness. Like there are ways in which, in trying to protect ourselves and provide safe spaces to shield queer people from homophobia, transphobia, kind of like all of these problematic conditions, there are ways in which I think we have sold ourselves short and have over promised and have over required safety, even in experiences with each other or experiences with people where something new might arise. So one of the arguments that I'm really interested in the book is kind of like what happens when you dare experiment and innovate and invent outside of the conditions of safety. And that's kind of what I'm playing with in the book.